Mahlon Conaway, August 5th, 1925. In Dawson, I guess. That's what's on my birth certificate. My dad got into trucking. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, like many moms back then. And, of course, she did all of the phone calls and everything for my dad. We didn't have Little League ball games. We got our own teams together and we played softball. And the reason we had to play softball because we didn't have any gloves to play baseball. Me and my brother, in the wintertime, we had customers that we shoveled snow for. And that's where we made a little extra money. Oh, you get a quarter, maybe. We had one guy, me and my brother and a couple neighbor kids shoveled a guy's place once, and he gave us 15 cents. We never did go back. Well, when I was still in high school, I worked on the weekends at a Skelly station pumping gas and greasing cars and changing oil, and so then if on Saturday, if I worked down there, I would go to work about 10 o'clock, and if I only had to work until about 4, why, I got 50 cents. And if I worked until after that, why, I get 75 cents. And then on Sunday morning, I helped a guy deliver Sunday papers in the country, and I got another 50 cents. So I was really making money. After that, I went roller skating. And they was talking about Pearl Harbor, and of course we didn't know anything what Pearl Harbor was. We had no idea what Pearl Harbor was. So when I was 18, I got called, and I went down and I didn't pass. And I think maybe I didn't weigh enough. And I got called back about 3 months after that, and then I passed. When I finished my infantry training, they shipped me overseas, and I was a replacement, and I joined the 36th Division, which is the Texas National Guard. So I landed at Omaha Beach. There was no shooting. This was like 3.5 months later, so there was no shooting. But I still had to go on shore the same way. Had to go over rope ladder, landing craft. I don't know how those guys, stood that. But so then we walked up that path, up the side of that cliff, and I ended up in the replacement center and went to the 36th Division. 5 of us went back over there in 2001 and went there. We made our own tour. And it was different, but if you're in that landing craft out there in that water and going in, and that has to be on your mind. Anybody that had to go in that way, you would just think about those troops that went in there before you, how bad that was. We joined the company on the front lines, which I'm sure that these guys have been there for some time, and here's these guys coming in that just never saw anything. How are they gonna react? We stayed buddies forever. We was in a little town in France. And we'd stopped there for a little bit, and there was somebody noticed this. It was a carrier pigeon because you could see the capsule on this lake, and it was flying around and land on this church steeple. And so they went and checked and found out that the United States didn't have any carrier pigeons in that area. It had to be German. So they said, shoot the pigeon. So these guys are down there shooting shingles off of this roof of this church, and I thought, I said, you guys ain't doing a very good job. So I walked down with my bazooka, and they said, you can't use that. They finally got the pigeon, and the word came back that there was supposed to be a German armored unit in a timber someplace in the area that was supposed to be coming through that area. So it was there for somebody that was in that town. Well, we crossed this river, and it was dark. And we ended up in a minefield. My unit I was with was a reserve unit, so we crossed the river, stayed out of the bank, but there was mortar shells coming in, So pretty soon a call came for the reserve unit to move up. So I moved up. I was leading the unit. Sergeant Parker was behind me. Went around a tree. And as I went around that tree, I saw a mine. So I said, Parker, there's a mine right there. So I called out, we got mines. And so I stepped over that, stepped by that mine, and Parker come around the tree and he saw that mine. And there's another one that was under some leaves. And he evidently kicked it, but tore up his foot. We must have lost 20 guys in that minefield. I stood there and I prayed. And finally I decided, hey, you know what to do. You know how to do this. And I crawled and I moved leaves and I moved leaves and I marked mines with a stick. It was probably 75 yards because I didn't want to go back and go across the river again. Down a ways, there was in the ditch rose bush, something, there's a big old thorny thing, and it just covered the whole ditch. And so I made my path down there, and then I got up and I walked right through the middle of that. That's how I got to the road. On down the road, another outfit was held up by a machine gun, and some of us guys went and helped clear out the machine gun, and that's me and another guy run down these Germans and ended up with about 20 prisoners. So that was a rough day. Mm-hmm. We had just relieved, well, I was in the Hagenhof Forest, and because we had relieved the 101st Airborne about a week before that. I was in the Siegfried Line. A bazooka shell was not very good against was worthless against these big concrete bunkers, but we tried. But anyway, with the combat engineers, we had taken this one big bunker. We were standing outside. We'd got a bunch of prisoners out of there. Some of the guys were inside. There was probably 5 or 6 of us outside. And I had laid my bazooka down. It was in a trench that was probably 3 foot high. And I had laid my bazooka shells and my bazooka on top of this trench. We were standing there talking about how we were going to take the next pillbox. This big railroad gun, we called Alsace Alice, would fire once in a while, about three or four, we'd heard it on and off for about 3 days, but they'd only fire maybe a couple of shells a day. Mm-hmm. So with artillery, you get to know the sound, whether it's close or not. And that we could hear that shell coming. We knew it was going to be close. Mm-hmm. We run in the pillbox. We got both doors shut. We just shut the inside door, just got it shut. And the shell hit that pillbox. We had a dust storm. Hit the corner of the pillbox, tore a big hunk out of the corner of that pillbox. And the door still worked. We went back outside, and my bazooka looked like a sieve, and it looked like you'd shot it with buckshot. And I never bothered to pick up either one. It was awful. You couldn't hear anything for a long time after that, or quite some time after that. Alsace Alice. That was the big gun. That's what it was called. They said there was one in Italy like it, and it was called Anzio Annie. The K rations was in a box, and there was different ones, but what I remember that we always got was cheese and crackers. And then they had a big chocolate bar that was separate, that was called a D bar. I was lead scout for the company, and we was moving out. We went quite a ways. He said the Germans was in the timber to our right, and it was tall grass, and so I was pretty much watching that direction, and I stepped in a hole. Got out of the hole, and I stood up, and I fell, and I got back up, and I fell again. So I ended up in the hospital. It took me a while to get there. We didn't have very many men anyway, and I didn't want 2 guys to go with me back because that's what it would have taken. And I said, I can just crawl. So I did. I probably crawled a mile. I crawled and I crawled up the bluff that we came down because I had been the lead scout. I knew the way, you know, so it wasn't that I didn't know how to get there. And I crawled up this path and I took a break and I got up top of this path up to this cliff that we came down, and there was big boulders up there. And I sat there to take a good rest. And I heard somebody behind me down the cliff. And so I didn't know whether they was Americans or Germans. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I decided I would space out my hand grenades between the boulders. Thought I'm just going to wait until that first helmet comes up. If it's German, I'm going to shoot. I'm going to roll to the first hand grenade, drop it over there. The first helmet that peeked up over the top was an American helmet. And it was 3 guys that had been stringing telephone wire. And 2 Frenchmen come down across the pasture. And they make all kinds of motions that they had to carry me. And they did. And I mean, these 2 Frenchmen picked me up and they carried, and they run. They run to they knew where the aid station was, said it was in a house. They took me inside, and then they went back outside. And these 2 guys are sitting right outside the door. And they want to make sure I'm all right. And I said, the doctor, I said, these guys think I took this town by myself. I said, you know, I was only one of about 60, you know, that took this town. And he said, no, that's not it. He said, you know what, they've only been liberated for maybe 4 hours. They have been under Nazi rule for 4 years, and this is the only way they know how to show the appreciation. They were so thankful that they would have just done anything, and they was there when the ambulance picked me up. I can remember crossing into Austria. In that area there was a lot of SS troops which were strictly Nazis. You get reports that the war's over, but that's somebody that's sitting back in Paris. They sent 5 of us down to this road junction out of town. Said that there's some German soldiers down there. Go down and secure that road junction. So we start walking down there, and we probably get 3/4 of the way down there. And a Jeep showed up and told us to stop, that they think maybe the war's over. So we sat there. There was the middle of the afternoon. We sat along the side of the road, and they brought us something to eat that night. And the next morning they came and told us the war was over. And we went down and to the road junction, and the few soldiers that was down there had already laid down their weapons. And there was another unit that went with these guys to the castle, and castle or chateau or something in Austria. And our CO's name is Matney, and one of the guys that contacted come across the field. And Matney was with a patrol, and this guy was telling about this castle. So instead of us going to the castle, it sat right outside of a town. And we secured this little village. We secured this village from the SS and the German soldiers that was in the area. They got rid of the uniforms, I think. And then after this other unit is the one that had the battle at the castle. Well, then afterwards we moved down there too at the castle. Because the one thing I could remember about this is that there was a high wall and a big gate in front. And a guy from this other unit climbed up on this wall and stood up. And he got shot. He was the last guy I saw get killed in the war. I learned that the world didn't revolve around me. I was just one part of it. And you've got to look out for everybody that's around you. You know, I don't care what people think, you know, whoever you associate with or everything, that's part of your life.